and will be uploaded onto the HPMA national platform after we've finished. If you want to ask questions, please use the chat function within Zoom. So just type in your chats. I will be taking a note of any questions, and I'll initially feed them back to Lynn at the end of her presentation. But then after that, we'll give anybody the opportunity to actually directly ask Lynn any questions that they want to at the end of the session. So without any further ado, I will switch off my own audio function and I'll pass over to Lynn, who's going to talk for around about 45 minutes in terms of leadership, and then we'll leave 15 minutes at the end for any questions that occurred during the presentation. So mute off and welcome, Lynn.
Thank you very much. My name's Lynn Cowan, for those of you that don't know me, and I'm one of the OD consultants in NHS, National Scotland Services Scotland. And thank you for inviting me to speak about leadership. Leadership is one of my great passions as an OD consultant, and it's something that hopefully today will give you some kind of food for thought around leadership in some of your own organisations. As Chris says, there'll be some time for questions at the end, but if you can, please make use of the chat function, because Chris will be monitoring that as we go through, and that will help us gather some questions. I think it's probably fair to say that I found it quite difficult to design this session, and simply because there's just so many aspects to leadership. You know, I could have talked, for example, about leaders in change, a leader as a coach, the resilient leader. There's just so much to talk about, and I would have probably taken up the whole day. So that is why I decided to sort of narrow it down to exploring really what the different perceptions of leadership actually are, and what is leadership in our 21st century as well. Has it changed? And what are our perceptions of this? And to do that, I think we'll look at the qualities and skills of an effective leader, and we'll also consider styles. Styles come into play as well. And really around that 21st century leader is about what are the expectations and challenges of our leaders today as well. And then really consider the importance of leaders regularly thinking about their own effectiveness and reviewing it, and how does that impact on their results, and also about kind of keeping themselves effective as well. I think it's fair to say I don't have all the answers. I can't tell you at the end of this, I'm not going to say to you, this is what an effective leader is, and this is what you have to do to be an effective leader. But hopefully what I'll do through this is I'm going to give you some food for thought, so that you can take it away and think about it in terms of the leaders in your own organisation, and what you can then go on to do to support them. So I like to start with this quote. A great boss is hard to find, difficult to leave, and impossible to forget. And the reason I start with this quote is because when we're starting to think about actually what are the qualities and skills of an effective leader, I find it really helpful to bring people to mind. And so what I'd invite you to do is really think about somebody who comes to mind for you, and then reflect on what made them great for you, and also what made them effective in the context of today's session and what we're going to be talking about. I think what's interesting about this, that in my whole career, which is a lot of years, I'm sad to admit, when I think about this, I can only think of two people that spring to mind. And that's quite challenging for me, because I've worked a lot of years, I've worked for a lot of leaders, but there's two people that really stand out for me. And what I hope I do when I'm in leadership roles is to role model these qualities, because the fact that I can remember them from so many years ago shows you what kind of impact they actually had. And talking about impact, you know, I'm really interested in the impact that both good and maybe not so good leadership can have as well, because I think that our leaders absolutely set the tone of the culture, and they have to be aware of their own power in doing that. So as a leader, every word, every action, even a stern glance, whether it's incidental or otherwise, actually has greater consequences. And I think leaders sometimes don't appreciate the power that they do have. And being a leader means you never forget that. You never forget the power that you actually have. And I think using the way leaders use power can really make that difference. And so what we'll do later on in this session is we'll go back and we'll look a bit more about what does using your power effectively mean. But it's just remembering that leaders have got to remember that every time they interact with somebody, they're actually telling that person, not just with their words, but with their entire presence, something about how valuable and important they are. And it's just something we've really got to remember. I think our leaders have got to remember it. It's just thinking about that kind of impact. So because of that passion around leadership, I actually lead the 2 leadership programmes in NSS. I'm really passionate about how do we develop our leaders to be able to give them that capability to go on and lead well in our organisation. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about these 2 programmes before we start to go on and actually look at effective leadership, because I think it's important to showcase what we do in our organisations and give you the opportunity to see what we're doing as well. So the 2 leadership programmes that I lead on one is the corporate leadership programme. And as you can see in there, the corporate leadership programme is open to all of our leaders in NSS. So there's no particular selection programme around that. It's open to all leaders. We always run a minimum of 2 modules a month. So there's always 2 modules on that our leaders can sign up for to participate in. And all of our modules are aligned to health and social care 6 core leadership competencies, which describe how we expect our leaders to behave in NHS Scotland. I think that's probably changed slightly over the last 2 years with the pandemic. And although the modules are still aligned to the 6 core competencies, well-beings come into play as well there. So we also look at our modules in terms of our well-being as well. And then the other programme I run is more of a tailored programme, and that is aligned to Project Lift. And so anybody who goes in and accesses Project Lift completes the self-assessment questionnaire, gets a report. And previously, that report would indicate for them if they were high fit for leadership. And every board gets a quarterly report telling us our staff that are high fit for leadership. And when sort of Project Lift started in 2018 and we started getting the reports early 2019, I suppose my first question was, if we've got people who have are high fit for leadership potential, what we're going to do with them? We can't just have them on a list and do nothing with them. And this is where the All Access Pass Tailored Leadership was born from and developed and created from. And it's a 5-month programme. The 5-month programme, I'm going to show you in a little bit more detail, and it's aligned to the Franklin Covey 7 Habits programme. And that is why it's called the All Access Pass, because part of this programme is getting access to leadership and management portal within Franklin Covey that our participants can make full use of whilst they've got their 12-month licence. So it's a really, really good programme. So going on to the leadership programme, we've got 4 pillars. And the 4 pillars in there. The 4 pillars in there, the first pillar is our external pillar. And that's where all the information about Project Lift is. Managers can go in and have a look at it. There's also NEST development programmes in there, like Leading for the Future. We promote the Leadership Link webinars in there and the Project Lift community events. Things like, you know, the Leadership Capabilities 360, the Project Lift 360, the Project Lift Careers Conversations Lite. All of these things are promoted in our first pillar. And then our second and third pillars are really our leadership modules. So the second pillar is all the leadership modules that we run 2 a month. And the third pillar is really the master classes. And the reason they're called master classes is because they're for larger groups of people. So an example of the master class would be, we had Michael West, who's the Professor of Work and Organisational Psychology at Lancaster University, to come in and deliver a compassionate and collective leadership cultures webinar for us. So that's the kind of things that would be in the master classes. And then the fourth pillar is bespoke, and that's where myself and the OD team really have to get involved, because that's where leaders will come to us around specific the development they want for their teams and their leaders and their teams, and we then go through the OD consultation process to scope and discuss options and then decide what's the best way forward to meet the client's needs. So I think with our leadership programme, what we're doing is we're providing a whole range of options to meet all individual and team needs within the leadership cohorts within NSS. With all of these things, the leadership programme, it is self-selection to come in, but we really do emphasise as well, it's important that anybody that's coming on any of the leadership modules, they really have to have had a discussion with their line manager, and it should be on their PDP, because they then have to discuss how they are going to apply it. That's just an example of some of the modules that we run. You can see there's some around well-being, the courage to be kind, the mindfulness, and then there's others around soft skills as well, around for strategic influence and psychology, safety in the workplace. So there's a real mix of modules that people can come on when they come in, and it's a mix of internal and external providers. So myself and some of the OD team deliver some of these modules, and we get external providers in there as well. And then the All Access Pass programme, and all I've done there to kind of emphasise that for you is really put up a timetable of how we do the programme. And as you can see, it is quite involved. There is a lot of work involved in it, but it does pay dividends at the end. And it's really based on 7 habits. That's the first course that come on, is the 7 habits. And then the participants do 3 sets of online modules, which are followed up by a spotlight session where they can discuss the learning, the application, and we do them on Teams. Now, spotlight sessions are really vital in the online modules, because what we're trying to do here is it's about mindset change. So when we're running this tailored leadership programme, what we're really looking for here is, how do we change mindset so that it's about looking at your effectiveness as a leader and the results you're getting, and could you do it differently, and could you do it better? And is there a different way of looking at things that will get you much better results? And what we're trying to create here is a community of leaders who recognise that mindset changes and more positive behaviours can have an impact on results and beliefs that you can achieve your outcomes. That is really what we're looking for. The critical practices for leading a team are around mindset changes, about getting the job done through other people, and the multiplier modules are about amplifying the capability of people and really using their intelligence. So there's a lot of really good tools and resources and things within these modules for people to use. We also try and keep people accountable. They've got to fill in a learning contract before they come on this. They've got to use reflection logs. So there's lots of things we do this. I think the success of this, there's a lot of tools, there's lots of modules and things in there, but for me, the success of this programme is in the finale event that's done by an external. And what she said to me is, when she looks at the people that have come on this programme, and she looks at the people who are just, come from the general leadership population within NSS, she can see a difference. There's more self-efficacy in the people that have come on this programme. There's more autonomy, there's an increased sense of agency and more proactivity. So it is making a difference, that the programme that we're actually doing. So we are reviewing the programme, and like with anything else, we will keep reviewing it and improving it as we go along. So that's what we do in NSS. And I think, as you can see there, we are providing a lot for our leaders. And in providing that, it's about saying, how can we make them as effective and as capable as we possibly can? So suppose, now what I'd like to think about is, what is an effective leader? And as I said to you, I don't necessarily have all the answers about what makes an effective leader. But with all the courses that I've run and all that, we've actually done 11 cohorts of this programme. So I have gathered a lot of data and I've gathered a lot of information as I've gone through. And some of the more common qualities and skills of effective leaders are what I've got up in the slide just now. And I think it's interesting to have a look at that, to be saying that, what are these competencies? And I'm sure there's some on there that you would come to mind, when you think about that great leader from that first slide I showed. There's probably some of these competencies, these qualities and skills that you could recognise in yourself. And there's nothing there I think is startlingly sticking out to be saying, why on earth would that be a skill or a quality? I think what's interesting for me in that is that there's nothing in there about saying a leader should be capable or competent. So that's not there. And there's nothing about results in there either. And I find that quite interesting, because I think that leaders can sometimes get very, very caught up in task and outcomes and achieving goals. But I think what we've got to always remember is that leaders lead people, and that's a vital part of their role. And I guess what these skills and qualities tell me is the way they enact that leadership role and the way they lead people is just vitally important. We still want the results and still want our leaders to be competent, because obviously that links into their credibility. But it's really about that kind of the skills and qualities about how they lead their people is vitally important to other people and the teams that they lead. The truth is, there's no magic combination. There's no magic combination that we can look at all these skills and qualities and actually say, if you're empowering and trustworthy and have empathy, that will make you an effective leader. It doesn't quite work like that. I think for a leader to be successful, what they've got to do is think about how these different skills and qualities may be more significant in different circumstances. So it might be that in circumstance they might find themselves that the skill and quality that's really significant might be having empathy. So I think it's about how do you all of these skills and qualities, it's about how do you use them for the situation you're in, how do you flex and adapt and use the skills that are more significant for the situation you find yourself in. And I think more importantly for me, these skills and qualities and the characteristics are external behaviours. These are all external behaviours, and they all emerge from what's going on in your mind. So whatever is in the leader's mind, that is what is actually driving their behaviours. So it's their internal beliefs, it's their perceptions, it's their values, and the things that are important to them that will drive these behaviours. And for me, around our All Access Pass programme, it's about saying, how do we examine or how do we review what these kind of external beliefs, values and perceptions are, and how are they working for our leaders? Are they hindering them or are they helping them? And we have to remember that a lot of the time we are operating from our own map of the world. And actually, is that actually helping us or is it actually hindering us? And it's really thinking about the paradigms we're operating from. Our paradigms and how we think affect our behaviours, and they affect our results as well. And it's really important to think about it. I suppose when kind of summing all of this up, I've pinched a slide from Michael West, and it's from his presentation on compassionate leadership for compassionate public services. And what he says in there is that if leaders can pay attention to their staff and be present and listen to them and share the understanding of what they face and empathise to show that understanding, and then support them about how they coach them to take that intelligent action to move forward. I just think that kind of sums it up. If a leader can at least do that, because for me that shows they're operating from sort of 3 underlying principles of great leadership, which are being authentic, having integrity, and being compassionate. And I think probably over the last 2 years, compassion has been really, really important. And when you can show these principles of being authentic, integrity, and compassion, it builds up trust. And when you can demonstrate trust, staff feel much more valued and much more productive. So it's really, really important. I just think it's a really good way of thinking. What do we look for in our leaders? It's a nice round way of looking at it. So as I said, there's no kind of magic formula around if you all of these traits, if you have all of these traits, you'll be an effective leader. It's about flexing and adapting some of those traits. But one of the other questions around this that I get asked a lot is that what would be the best leadership style? So I get asked a lot about leadership styles, and I get asked about, what would be a good leadership style? What would I say would be the best leadership style? I would never actually recommend a particular leadership style. I don't think there's any that are the panacea for effective leadership. I think different styles come into play for different situations and environments. And I've just put up some of the leadership theories and styles on the slide just now. There's some that I probably resonate more with than others, and I'm sure I'm just going to run through them very quickly, and some will resonate more with you as well. And that's situational leadership. I'm sure some of you will be very, very aware of, where it's that kind of telling, selling, participating, and delegating. And that's really adapting your leadership style to the maturity of the staff member. So when somebody's very, very new, you might go into telling mode. Once they become more experienced and competent, it's into delegating mode. Transactional leadership is a really interesting one. And in fact, I was running an event recently, and somebody actually said to me that they really liked transactional leadership. We had a discussion about that. And transactional leadership is where leaders believe that people are motivated by reward or punishment. So the leader sets clear goals and provides support and recognition. But it's really more about supervision, it's organisation, it's about performance. So it's very much about task, transactional leadership. So they can still be supportive, but it's really around that reward and punishment. So if something goes wrong, it's about, who's to blame, why is the failure? And it's about, when the person said to me, actually, I really like that style of leadership, I suppose for me, it was about saying to them, what's the impact of that? Because that's the important piece. If you lead like that, tell me what results you're getting and what's the impact on the staff. And if you thought about it differently, what could you get greater results? A lot of people like transformational leadership. Transformational is about setting clear goals. It's about inspiring people through vision, motivation, trust. So it's all that really good kind of leadership style. And adaptive leadership is the one we use on Leading for the Future. And that's really about how do we get people involved in the process. So I think what's interesting about adaptive leadership, it's not about hierarchies. It's about saying who are the best people to do the job, and how do we find solutions to complex challenges, and who do we need to do that? It's not always the most senior people. Who are the people we need in the room to do that? I don't know if you know much about Lewin. He's very kind of, it's autocratic, democratic, or laissez-faire. So it goes kind of from one extreme of being very command and control to the other extreme of letting people do what they like. And then the one that a lot of people really resonate with is Goleman's 6 emotional leadership styles. And I find people tend to resonate with that the most. So it's the authoritative leader, which is come with me. It's the coaching leader about try this. It's the affiliative leader saying, what do you need and how can I help you? The democratic leader, what do you think? The pace-setting leader, how do I do this now? How do we get results? And the coercive leader, there is the do what I tell you, because sometimes in an emergency or in a crisis that needs to happen. So there's lots of different styles in there, and I think the reason people quite like this style is because it gives them that ability to flex and adapt around the different styles as well. But as I said with qualities, there's no leadership style, one leadership style that fits all. Again, it's about flexing between the different styles depending on the circumstance and the environment. And I think what's really important sort of going forward is to acknowledge that there's constant change. There's constant change all the time. And constant change in our working lives does have an impact on our leadership and actually how we lead. And it's about how leaders can very quickly flex and adapt to those changing environments. So in our organisation, one of the ways that we're having to change and adapt just now is to hybrid working. And that's going to bring its own set of challenges with it. And that's what we're working on now within the organisation. How do we flex and adapt to hybrid working? And there's been lots of examples of where, as leaders have had to adapt to changes. Again, I'm going to show my age slightly, but I remember a long time ago that we used to have to call our leaders Mr. Smith and Mrs. Smith, etc. There was no first names. You called your leaders by their Mr. or Mrs. title. And I remember when that changed, and it was really hard for some of our leaders because they'd been called Mr. or Mrs. for years. And all of a sudden we had a staff member coming up and calling them John or Pamela or whatever their name was. And that was really hard. And the other huge thing I do remember, because I'm not very good technically, was when we went on to email. And again, that was just over 20 years ago, 25 years ago. We went on to email. That was a huge change for organisations and a change for the better. But it's just saying that we all have to adapt at some point. Things are changing all the time. And how do leaders use these leadership styles to help them change? So I guess what I'm saying is there'll be all different perceptions of what the real good skills and qualities and styles are as a leader. And what our leaders have got to do is what fits for them, what works for them, and how do they make sure that they adapt and flex using these different styles. Because our leaders have got a lot of challenges to face. And in doing all the leadership courses that I run, again, as I said, I've been gathering data and about what actually are some of the challenges coming up. And these are some of the challenges that are really, really common or recurring themes, if you like, of some of the challenges I'm kind of finding. And I think the balancing workload and protected time for staff is a really important one. Because as I said at the beginning, I think often the perception of leaders is that their main purpose is to achieve results, drive business outcomes, increase value for the organisation. And while it's true, because it is, they do have to do that stuff, I think it ignores that really important critical function of a leader, which is leaders lead people. And leaders need their people to help them achieve all these outcomes and achieve these results. And leading people means that leaders are responsible for their performance and their well-being. And it's really, really important. So it's easy to get lost in the focus of task. And leaders do so at a cost because they lose focus on the health and well-being of their people. And building these effective relationships is a vital competence of leadership. You're referring back to that Michael West slide that I showed you earlier. Being able to sit down and be there for your people when they need you, it just builds that trust, and it then allows you to them to become much more productive because they feel valued and they want to be productive for you. So it's people before task, and that can be quite difficult for a lot of people. So it is people before task, and it's motivated staff who feel valued will have higher productivity. It's a proven fact. And so taking the time to have these relationships with staff is really important, and keeping that protected time. And for some people, I suppose over the last 2 years especially, that has been very, very difficult. especially during the pandemic. Another huge one is around support from above, senior leaders. A lot of leaders feel they don't get that support above in terms of the decisions or their decision-making ability. They don't feel valued, they feel lack of support or opportunity to develop or grow. They're kind of stuck in their niche. Rigid hierarchies. I think we can all acknowledge that NHS Scotland is a hierarchical traditional organisation. So it's important that we look at how decisions are made. Are they all made at a senior level and are they all top down? And what does that then do in terms of expanding people's experience or allowing people to innovate? If it's all top down, absolutely limits and kills innovation. And how do we use the really, when I talked about these multiplier modules, how do we absolutely amplify the capabilities of the staff we've got? We've got a lot of staff with a lot of great skills and experience, and are we fully utilising them and allowing them to utilise them? And it's really these rigid hierarchies really depend a lot on that use of power and how power can be used effectively or not. And then culture, that's a huge one. I don't even know where to begin with culture, to be honest with you. But culture is, again, the perceived norms of our organisations. And some of these perceived norms might not be serving us anymore. So the way we do things around here just might not be serving us anymore. And how do we try and change that? Because it can be very difficult being a lone voice trying to change a culture. How do we embrace the diversity of the people we've got in our organisations? Politics, yeah, that's an interesting one. Office politics exist in virtually all organisations that I know of. And in this context, we're looking more at there's a positive side of politics, but in this context, we're looking at the more negative side of politics. And when we look at the negative side of politics, we're thinking about activities that are performed by individuals to improve their own status, to advance their own personal agenda, and sometimes at the expense of others. So a lot of the politics in a negative connotation are very, very self-serving, and it can come with really negative impact as well. It can stop people stepping up. They don't want to get involved in the politics of things. So it's really important that how do you kind of rise above that and role model the good values of the organisation. And then traditions and legacy. This is the way it's always been and it can't be changed. And I think we can agree we've come across that a lot. And then people and personalities. And again, that's an interesting one for leaders. I think it does feel good to work with and connect with people who are familiar to us, or people who are like us, or people who have the same traits as us. And we have to work much, much harder when these commonalities aren't just as self-evident. So our brain, I think, naturally wants to categorise where we belong, and we have to make choices to see past assumptions that we have about people. So when leaders come to me about people and personalities, I would be tending to say to them, what's your assumption about this person? How can you do it differently? What are you assuming before you're going to have the meeting with them? So it takes a kind of, I think with all of these things, they're all about culture in a way. So all of these things are about environment and they're all about culture. And how do you, in COVID we talk about transition people. How do you become that transition person that tries to break some of the norms that aren't working for us? How do leaders do that? And how do they break these unhelpful patterns? And that can be a very difficult place to be unless you've got some like-minded people around you at the same time, which is what we're trying to do with our All Access Pass programme. I can't go on without thinking about the challenges the pandemic has brought us as well. And around hybrid working, and I asked some of my project lift leaders about what they thought some of the real challenges around this were, and it's about that managing remotely and how do you keep staff engaged and motivated. So a lot of the challenges came from that building the sort of mental resilience, you know, being careful about staff's mental health, showing compassion and care and building trust. How do you do that over a screen, I guess, is what a lot of people were saying. And I suppose, you know, a lot of the top tips around that are just making sure people feel connected and knowing what the shared goals are of the team and remembering to care. I think that's kind of some of the things that we do talk about when we look at some of these challenges for leaders kind of going forward. So there's a lot of challenges there that we have to think about, and the expectation basically around that is that leaders still have to motivate our staff. They still have to keep them motivated, they still have to keep them doing the job, and they still have to keep getting these results as well. And when we think about motivation, there's a lot of theory around that. One of the more common ones is Maslow's theory of human motivation and theory of human needs. Hertzberg's two-factor theory of motivation. They're kind of common motivators that most OD people will know about. They're some of the common ones, but I think there's more to it. You know, I think whilst they are still relevant, we really have to think about the demographic of the workforce as well, because it's got an impact on how people are motivated. And what leaders will find now, that within their teams, there will be a whole host of and variety of age groups in the teams. Pension age has changed, people are having to work to their 67. So you could, leader could have somebody in their team, you know, their age ranges could be from people in their 20s up to people in their 60s. And it's about how do they flex and how do they adapt to actually think about how they motivate all of their staff. And bearing in mind each person has a unique set of qualities and each person has a unique set of needs as well. I think we've got to remember that as well. And how do you, as a leader, how do people as leaders create an environment that allows people to both perform at their best and actually thrive as well? Because some of the different sort of generations up on the slide. Now, these are broad generalisations. Let me make that quite clear. I am not saying that everybody that's within these different age groups behaves in that way, but research has shown us that there's some really sort of broad generalisations in there. And interestingly enough, I just got my new People Management magazine in, and the People Management magazine, the headline on it is The Best Young HR Talent, and it's 30 people in their 30s who are making a difference in HR. And when I kind of flipped through it, what was interesting was that the real thing that motivated them was being able to make an impact and a difference. And I think that says a lot. How do we enable our new people coming through to make that impact and that difference? Because that is what's motivating them. But again, when we look at our generations, it's very much around how do we allow our Generation Z people who are very tech savvy, how do we, you know, allow them to do all the digital stuff that they want to do? You'll find that they want to move careers very, very quickly as well. They don't stay in a job for a long time like we used to do sort of years ago. And how does that flexibility in schedules and that flexibility in being able to work different hours as people go through the generations, that becomes much, much more important as well. And that desire to learn and contribution, that can change as well as people go through the generations. And what makes a difference to each of these generations as we go through. So leaders really need to get to know the staff. They need to get to know the staff and they need to get to know what works and actually what doesn't work. And they have to flex and adapt. And that's not saying that they're not consistent. We're not saying we don't want our leaders to be consistent. What we're saying is they need to flex and adapt to enable people to be motivated, depending on what actually motivates them. So you have to be, good leaders have to be comfortable using different styles of leadership, dependent on the combination of skill of each person that they influence. They have to be very, very comfortable doing that. And that kind of leads me on to thinking about power, because we did discuss power earlier on, and how leaders' power can have such an impact on their staff by their words or their actions. It really does have an impact on how they kind of wield that power. And in general, I think leaders are perceived to have power. I think they definitely are. And it's about being able to say, how do we, and I think it would take a whole session for us to talk about the role of power in leadership. So I'm just going to touch on how power is derived from the rules of the organisation. And that's where power comes from. That is where it's derived from. What are the norms and the rules of your organisation will impact the power that the leaders have. And I've been looking at a book, and it's called New Power, and it's by two guys called Jeremy Hymans and Henry Timms. And they advocate that for most of human history, the rules of power were very, very clear. It was something to be seized, it was something to be jealously guarded. And under old power, we live in a world of rulers and subjects. And actually, I think some traditional organisations are still a derivative of that, very much so. It's those who rule in senior positions and the subjects that get the work done and do the work. So sometimes I think that's still very much a derivative of that. But old power works like currency. It's kind of held by a few, it's jealously guarded, and it's closed, it's inaccessible, and it's leader driven. So what it does is it downloads and captures. And in the 21st century, expectations of our staff have changed. They want to be involved, and the advancement of technology has enabled them and given them an ability to get involved and participate. And they want to engage and come together and affect change. As I said to you, when I looked at the people management, people want to have an impact and want to make a difference. They want progression and they want transformation. And this is new power. And new power operates slightly differently. It's like a currency, like water and electricity. It's most powerful when it surges out the way. It's made by many, it's open, participative, and it's peer-driven. And it uploads and distributes. And leadership becomes more of a function than a role. And it's about these kind of balances between formal and informal governance. I honestly believe we have got so much red tape sometimes in our organisations that actually getting a decision or getting something done is really, really hard. So how do we still have governance? I'm not saying doing away with it, but how do we make decisions easier? How do we do that? It's about competition versus collaboration. How do we share our knowledge? How do we get as many people to collaborate as possible? It's about confidentiality versus radical transparency. I've got a real thing about confidentiality. I work in HR. Of course, I understand confidentiality and I understand why it's important. What I don't understand is why some things are branded as confidential. Things like minutes of meetings, unless they've got people's names or details or something about them in it, what makes it confidential? And I think these are questions we've got to ask ourselves. Experts versus makers. And again, this is a tricky one because we, especially in the health service, we do need our experts. But again, there's something about how do we, in some environments, do we have to bring people in to do things, or can we actually do it ourselves and try things for ourselves as opposed to thinking we can't do it? And then there's long-term versus transit affiliation. How do we bring people in and out of jobs? Very much in a project management way, bring people in and out as they're needed without people having to sit in teams and be doing the same thing all the time. So how do we allow more participation and expand that participation? And these old power and new power aren't binary choices, they're blended, but it's about saying the degree of new power you've got really depends on the leaders of the organisation, it depends on its culture, and it depends on the environment. And if you're in a traditional organisation, expectations around being seen and being heard and being involved, and how do you make that happen? How do you start signalling? How do we encourage our leaders to start signalling that you have got a desire to listen and to encourage greater participation? It's really, really important we do that. A good leader will amplify the capability of the people around them. And it's interesting when I do ask leaders, what kind of mindset do you think you have, an old power or a new power? And thinking about their own organisations, is it predominantly old power or new power? And if it is old power, what impact does that have on leadership and culture and also results going forward? So we do know that we need to make more changes, but it's quite difficult to actually make these changes. And a model that I like to use when I'm looking at changes and when I'm working with leaders around what kind of results are you getting and are these results working for you? And what we talk about is the results depend on what we do. And what we do depends on how we see things and how we see the world. And we see the world as we are, not as it is. So we have all got our own perceptions, beliefs, and so do our leaders. Our leaders have their own perceptions, beliefs about how things should get done. That then impacts their behaviours, and that then impacts the results. So when leaders come to me and say, I'm not getting the results I want, they could change their behaviour and they could have short-term gains and it could make a difference. But when the pressure comes, you'll find they'll revert back to their original habits. But if you want to make long-term sustainable changes, I would say to leaders, it comes from reevaluating your perspective and the way you see things. Is your perspective helping or hindering you? And if it's hindering you, it's an alternative way to think about things, which will then impact your behaviours and will then impact your results. So it's like somebody coming to me, I get a lot of leaders coming to me and saying things like, I'm going to have a difficult conversation. And the first thing I say is, difficult for who? Because you've labelled it difficult. You're thinking about it as being difficult. The person coming into the room doesn't know it's going to be difficult. So the minute your paradigm is, I'm going to have a difficult conversation, it will leak out in your behaviours and you will not get the results that you want. So how can you reframe that and be saying, I'm going to have a supporting conversation? So sometimes these mindset changes, it's just about reframing the way you're looking at things. And I think that's really important for our leaders. If you're not getting your results, look at your paradigms around it. And it's like, a couple of layers, a difference between saying I'm responsible for my results and I'm responsible for delivering results through other people. There is a difference there because the second one implies that you're actually involving your people and your teams in it. And the one I do like is I hold one-to-ones to check progress, which I think most people do. And think of the difference if you went in and thought about it around, I hold one-to-ones to support people and get and stay engaged. That's a completely different mindset, which will then give you completely different behaviours and hopefully completely different results as well. So it's really important to think for me to leaders about how are your mindsets and your perceptions and your beliefs actually serving you and getting you the results that you want. And it's about being able to say, how can I change that? And one of the courses I run, we do a little exercise around that, around how do you change your mindset? How can you actually do that? And how can you start practicing that? Because it is important where we're not getting results from leaders. It's about how do we help them think about more effective ways of actually doing it, more effective ways of thinking about it. And I think in doing that, just kind of lastly to say, that leaders have to also look after themselves in terms of all the things we've just talked about there. All the challenges, all the expectations on our leaders. Leaders are there and they're expected to fix their team's problems, but they also have to look after themselves, because if they're not looking after themselves, then they've not got the ability to look after their teams. And what I find is that leaders who look after themselves, it really helps with that decision-making process. It helps them have a clear head around how they lead. Leaders that don't, one, they're setting a bad example, because if you're working all hours, you're setting a bad example to your team members as well. But there's something about how can you look after other people if you're not feeling good in yourself? How can you do all of these things that we're asking you to do if you're not, looking after yourself? So I think it's really important for our leaders to look at their own self-care and the importance of self-care and the importance of making sure they are taking time to absolutely recharge. And I just want to finish off by thinking about HR's role in supporting leaders. And we have to really think about our policies and processes. Are they supporting our leaders? And how do we make sure our leaders understand that these policies are there to support? Are our processes serving our leaders as well? How do we take a coaching approach in HR to encourage our leaders to take responsibility and think independently about how they're going to do things, not just leaving it to HR to tell them what to do. We have to be aware of the leadership context linked to our organisation, vision, strategy and workforce plans. What are we expecting of our leaders, and what is that leadership context in terms of strategy? We've got leadership development programmes, talent management strategies. How are they all serving our leaders and helping us develop them and develop their capability? Leading by example. I think HR have got to lead by example and embody organisations' values. And then last but not least, something I think gets missed a lot is that effective contracting as an HR person and an OD person. It's really focused. You have to focus on the contracting to establish the expectations and agree parameters when you're working with your client. It's really, really important. I think we could do a whole session on contracting itself, but it's got to be done. And then the last slide, is the last slide I promise, I want to leave you with, it's just this quote. And I think great leadership is a legacy. And it's not about what you leave within people, with people, for people, it's what you leave within them. And a mark of a great leader is not just how well you lead, it's how well you develop the people that you lead as well. So I think before becoming a leader, success is all about growing yourself. And when you become a leader, success is all about growing others. And I don't think our leaders can lose sight of that. And thank you very much for listening to me. And I've kind of got 5 minutes left. Sorry, Chris, I kind of ran over very slightly there.
Not at all. I'm famous for that.
I'm just going to stop sharing now so I can see the screen. It's better.
Okay, Lynn, thanks very much for that. Very informative. I'm sure everybody else enjoyed it as much as I did. There's a couple of questions. Some have come offline in different formats. So first one goes back to something that you said right at the start. So just before I ask you, I'll just say if anybody wants to raise a question for them, and then just raise your hand in the functions and I'll bring you in. But we've got a couple of questions offline here. So first one, right back to start of your presentation when you talked about the fact that you'd only had really two people that you kind of admired their leadership skills. So the question came in that was, what was it about, given that you work in leadership, what was it about these two individuals? What skills did they have? What qualities did they have that you, as somebody who down the line has worked in this area, admired?
One of the qualities was somebody that came in and she was a management trainee and started at the bottom and worked her way up and well past me. And she never lost her genuineness and authenticity, and she would always make time for people. So even sort of moving up and even excuse me, talking too much, excuse me, and even when having to make tough decisions, she did it in such a way that she let people know rationales and they knew she was credible and genuine. And I think we can all bandy about words like being authentic and genuine, but actually to embody that and be it, that's what she was. And I just never forgot that she never changed as a person and really genuine in everything she did. And the second person, Paul, was actually probably quite tough in me during the time I worked for him, and I wrote reports for him. And he trained me and supported me in being the best I possibly could be. And even though he was quite tough and I was writing reports, his intention was always really clear. I want you to be the best you can be at doing this. I want you to really succeed. And I just think these two traits really, really stuck with me. And it stuck with me as a leader as well. When I had a team, I always wanted to make sure my staff got promoted and did really, really well. So these are the things that just kind of stuck with me, that genuineness and that wanting people to do well. Are just two traits that really stuck with me. It wasn't about them as leaders, it was about the people as well.
Thanks. So there was a second question. I had written down something you said when you were talking about hybrid working. I'd written, how do you lead virtually? But then Jenny Pope came in and asked it far more eloquently. So I'll read hers out from the chat that says, what would you say the top leadership skills are for leaders working in a hybrid environment? Putting you on the spot there.
I've talked about it. It's making sure. Sorry?
I said, I'm putting you on the spot there.
I think it's not at all. I think it's about making sure people feel connected. I honestly do. I think it's about people feeling connected around it. I think it's about making sure we're caring and checking in with people. I mean, there's lots of things. It's about making sure people know what's really, really important. You know, I think that sense of direction for people will be really important kind of going through. Trust will be huge. Trust will be a huge thing in hybrid working. It's about, we have to trust people to do the job. And I always think that we should, as a leader, a really good leader will go in and will expect trust. They will trust people until it's proven differently. That's it. That's a sign of a really good leader in this, and it'll be especially true for hybrids. How do we make sure we go in and we extend trust immediately without thinking about it? And it's only when that maybe trust changes we have to have these supporting conversations. But I think that's important. I think acknowledging people's accomplishments is going to be really, really important. About making sure you've got time for people, maybe designate. You know, so there's lots of different things in there. I think you can do, but really that open. You know, it's like anything. I think working in hybrid, it's like any kind of leadership skills. It's just that we're going to have to, our communication is going to have to be really, really heightened to make sure we're open and we're transparent and we're honest. And we really sort of make sure people feel connected. I think that'll be, and connected to that vision and goal of the team. And I think if we can do that and give them that sense of purpose, I think that makes a huge difference.
Maybe just one final question from the chat. So it's around about staff well-being and new ways of working. So during the pandemic, how do you think that's affected the need for leadership skills at all levels? And this kind of links in to one of the theories that we were talking about, seeing leadership as a function, but maybe a function at all levels across the organisation now more than it has been before.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, I'm going to say this in a nice way. I think we talk a lot about wellbeing personally, and I think the proof has to be in the actions. What are we actually doing around people's wellbeing? So let me give you an example. We have just started menopause sessions in NHS, and I just thought, big demographic, better wellbeing, and it's been a tremendous success in doing that. So we're actually taking some actions, we're actually doing something. I think for a lot of leaders, having these wellbeing conversations can be very, very difficult. And what leaders are doing, and I'm generalising here, is they're saying to people, is everyone okay? And they're saying, yeah, we're all okay. And they're going, right, that's fine. You've got to delve deeper. You've got to delve deeper. You know, when you're not seeing people, you've got to really get to know your staff. And you've got to be able to, you know, if that person's usually quite, talks quite a lot and they're quieter, it's about, and I think it is sometimes for some leaders, it's about being brave and actually having these well-being conversations. And it's not about saying, are you okay? Because people will go, yeah. It's about saying, what's happening with you? And being able to ask the types of questions that open it up a little bit as well. So, and I think it's not just leaders that are responsible for that, it's that leadership function. You're absolutely right. I would like to think if one of my colleagues or somebody I knew was maybe a bit off par, I should take it upon myself to contact them and say, how are you doing? And it's about us being able to do that with each other, but not just saying that, are you okay stuff? Because that, you know, like I say, I don't think that, it's about, you know, change it, think about how you ask it, how you go approach it, what's happening with you. It's just, that's a nice way, I think, of opening it. And it just allows people to share as much or as little as they want. But I think we've all got a responsibility around wellbeing. I think we need to do an awful lot more of it.
Great. Lynn, I think we've used up our time. And thank you for your comments. If you've done anything within this, you've piqued everybody's interest in going back and having a look at their leadership management theory. So that's what's coming through loud and clear from the chat in there. Everybody's needing to go back and have a look at given what you've said. So thank you very much. We really appreciate your time. Can I just say thank you to everybody for attending as well. Our next HPMA webinar will be on celebrating success, something that we probably don't do enough within the NHS. It's going to be a month today, so please look out for for some of the flyers coming out across the next day, and hopefully you can all make it a month. So thank you very much, Lynn, and thank you everybody. Look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.